Well, hello again, and welcome back to the Philippines. I'm still around the Dumaguete area in Negro Oriental, and I'm up in the mountains today at a place called Vista Panorama. I believe that's what it is. You can see just gorgeous up here. That swimming pool is actually hot water. It's not super hot, just say it's nice and warm. And you can see just beautiful mountains up here. I'm up at, I don't know, 2,000–3,000 feet, so it's nice and cool. So I thought I'd talk today about the girls of Southeast Asia in 1983. Nothing vulgar or anything like that, just interesting events that happened to me at the time. I flew over to Singapore in January of 1983 on a one-way ticket looking for some work. And between September, I graduated in either August or September of '82 from college down in Southeast Florida, Florida Institute of Technology. And they had told me the whole time I was there that, you know, we could go out and make $100,000 a year as a diver. So I talked my brother into going to a 3 or 4 month technical dive school, and then he followed me over to Singapore. And he was very much a waterman. But when we got there wasn't a whole lot of work, so my brother was more into looking for some girls to date, you might say. And he's 5 years older than me. I was 21 and he was 26. And I wasn't an inexperienced guy. I had 3 pretty crazy girlfriends between the time I was 18 and 21, so I was pretty experienced. But my brother was into the Oriental-looking women. And so he met a Thai girl and started dating her on a regular day-to-day basis. And one night I was out just enjoying the sights and scenes of Singapore. And when I come back to the hotel, which I was sharing a room with him, I walk into the room and he's in bed with his Thai girlfriend. And he's like, surprise! He says, I brought you a present. And that was her roommate. And so there was a young lady of Thai descent that was laying naked in my bed waiting for me to come home. So she didn't speak any English or very little English, and I spent the night with her, and you know, everything was okay. It's you know, young men do what young men do. And they got up the next day and they left, and I think my brother made another week, maybe not even that, before he left, and there wasn't a whole lot of work. And I was determined to find a job and get a career going, so I stayed. And he went ahead and left and flew down to Bali and then back to the States. But I found some work, and I was hanging out with some guys, and a couple of them were Indian, and they ate like huge amounts of chilies, and a lot of the food there was very spicy for me anyway, from where I grew up. But I started to notice after a while, like, you know, whenever I went to the bathroom, there was burning sensations on, let's say, both ends, you know. So going to the toilet, whatever you were doing, it's burning on both sides. And I didn't think too much of it. I was thinking, well, you know, I've got this spicy diet now, and you know, it's affecting me. So gonorrhea was going around at that time over in that part of the world, and very few guys were using condoms because, like, we'd never even heard of AIDS back then. I'd hear about it later that year, but at that time nobody knew about AIDS. And guys had told me, if you get gonorrhea, you're going to know it. It's like you're going to be peeing razor blades. Like, you won't have any doubt. You'll be running to see a doctor. And so, okay. Well, I didn't really think too much of it when I was urinating and it was a bit, like, warm, let's say. So I went ahead at some point, and a few weeks later, and I took a bus up through Malaysia to Penang, which is an island in northern Malaysia, and I was there for a couple of days, and I was headed up to Thailand. And I met this guy, and he's like eating antibiotics one night when I'm talking to him. I'm like, oh, you catch gonorrhea? He's like, nah, NSU. I'm like, NSU, what's that? He says, non-specific urinary tract infection. And he starts talking about the symptoms, and he's like, oh yeah, it burns a little bit when you urinate, it's not that uncomfortable, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, okay. Why don't you tell me a little bit more? Because I think I might know somebody that has this. So he's telling me, and he's like, Yeah, he says, it's not a big thing. It's a urinary tract infection. You can cure it with ampicillin. And he says, if you're headed up to Thailand, you can get antibiotics there anywhere in the stores, drugstores or whatever they had at that time. He says, just go in and get some ampicillin and take it for 2 weeks and you'll be fine. So I'm like, okay. So I go up to the island of Koh Samui, which is now a very popular tourist destination. But at that time, there I think was one like sort of real hotel, and everything else were like grass bungalows and stuff on the beach. And while I was up there, I went into town and I got some medication and I picked up some penicillin, which is what my doctor used to give us all the time as a kid. So I took penicillin for, I don't know, a week, 10 days, and nothing was changing. So I trucked my butt into town where there was a tiny like hospital clinic and went in to see if I could find some help for what I had. And I get into the clinic, and lucky me, there's a guy who's trained in Miami in the hospital down there, and he's now in Thailand. He's a Thai, but he had actually did his training, medical training at an emergency room or a hospital down in Miami, and he speaks fluent English. So he's talking to me, and he's like, okay. So I found out what it's like to have a swab put where you don't want to have a swab. And he says, come back in a couple days, and I come back in a couple days, and he's like, hey, he says, I see you're taking penicillin. I'm like, yeah. I tell him the story about this guy. He's like, that won't cure it. He says, you got to have ampicillin. And I'm like, pretty sure that's what the guy told me when I was talking to him that night, and I didn't pay attention. And a little dose of ampicillin, and everything cured up, and luckily I've never had anything since then. But that was my first experience with an Asian woman. And thank you, my brother. That was quite the present for your little brother. He still thinks it's funny to this day. I didn't think it was so funny. But on that trip home, back to Singapore, I'm taking a train down through, I guess that is north. That'd be the east side of Thailand. And I'm on this train, and I've only got a little bag with me. And this guy sits down at a table with me, and I'm sitting in like a dining car. And the guy looks like he's been in a knife fight and dropped his knife. I mean, he has got scars everywhere on him. I mean, he's looking pretty rough. And he's pimping girls on the train. And I'm like, dude, I'm not looking for a hooker on the train. I'm just trying to get down to the border, and I'm going home. And he talks to me for a while, and he spoke halfway decent English, and he's going on, and I'm like, nah, I'm not really interested, man. I'm just trying to get back to Singapore. I got to go back to work. I'm broke. And he goes, okay. He says, you do know that the border closes at 5 o'clock. I'm like, what do you mean the border closes at 5 o'clock? He says, oh yeah. He says, not very busy border. He says, all the guards go home at 5 o'clock. He says, you can walk across the border into Malaysia, but he says, you won't be legal because you won't have your passport stamped. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. And the guy gets up and leaves, and this is sometime in the afternoon, and that time there's no internet, so I've got a book called Southeast Asia on a Shoestring. And I look in the book, and sure enough, that the border closes at 5 o'clock, and we're getting in at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. So I'm spending one more night in Thailand, and luckily I always give myself a day buffer for stuff like this, so I did have one more day on my visa. So we get into this little town, which is literally a little town at the end of the train tracks, you might call it, right at the border of Malaysia. And I get off the train, and I got to go find a place to stay, and who pops up in front of me? This little Thai guy, the knife fight guy who dropped his knife somewhere along the way. And he shows up, and he's like, hey, you're a nice guy. He says, you told me you don't have any money. He says, I find you a cheap place to stay. And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. He's like, no. He says, you have no money. He says, I know everybody here. He says, I find you a cheap place. And I don't know, the guy's like 5 foot. I'm 6'3". I'm like, all right, if we don't go any dark alleys, I'm willing to go for a walk with you. So he takes me down the street, and he goes into a place, and he comes back, and he's like, no, all full. And we walk a little farther. He goes into another place, and there's a hotel there. And I walk into this hotel, and I'm like, how much is a room for tonight? It's about $20 US. And in 1983 in Thailand, Southeast Asia, you could normally find a room for $2 or $3 a night. So I'm like, nah, $20 is definitely out of my budget at that time. And he comes back out, and he takes me around the corner, and he goes up some steps, And he comes back out, and he's got an older woman with him, and he's, come on up here, come on up here. So I walk up, and there's this older lady and him, and she doesn't speak any English, and he takes me in, and he shows me around this little place, and he shows me some rooms, and he's like, yeah, you can sleep here, and you walk down the hallway down there, there's a couple showers and toilets, and you know, and you can spend the night here. And it's translates into about $1.65. So I'm like, okay, there we go. We're in the $2 budget. That's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for a place to sleep for the night. And he did say something about the girls know you have no money, or I didn't catch it. I did catch the fact that he said something like that later on when I put it all together, but I didn't pay much attention to it. And yeah, I mean, it's just a basic room with a bed and a fan. That's all that's in it. So I leave my bag and I go down and I take a shower and I come back. And there's 3 young ladies sitting on my bed. And they're all going, ah, you sleep with me, you sleep with me. No money, no problem. And I'm like, what? And, you know, the girls are like, ah, you know, you sleep with me, I sleep with you. And I'm like, okay. So, I was 21. Okay, I'll be honest, I was 21 and I was exploring my roots in Southeast Asia. So I picked out one of the young ladies, and she chased the other 2 out of the room, and she spent the evening with me. And so the next day I got up and I left the hotel, and I'm thinking, wow, that was the most interesting night in a hotel. And as I got stamped out of Thailand and I went into Malaysia, who do I run in on the other side of the bridge? The same guy that lost the knife fight, you know, the guy that took me to the hotel. And I'm like, I got to go over and talk to him. And I go over and, you know, explain to him, like, my God, man, he took me into this place and the events that happened the night before. And he starts laughing. And by this time I realized he had taken me from brothel to find me an inexpensive place for the night. And he's like, oh yeah, they never seen no round eye before in that time. He says, you could have spent the whole week there and all the girls would have wanted to sleep with you. They've never seen white guys before. So I was a bit of an oddity in South Thailand in 1983. So I used to like to tell this story to my friends, and my wife heard this story many times too. I thought it was the best hotel deal I'd ever gotten. For $1.65, I had a most memorable evening in southern Thailand in 1983. And with that, I will leave everybody goodbye. Hopefully nobody's too offended, but that was just the way things were back in 1983 when you're a young man. All right, guys, goodbye to everybody. Cheers. That was not the finger. That was supposed to be this. All right, bye.